Imagine being 22 years old. You have plans for your future. You're preparing to leave Australia and travel to Japan to pursue a career as a dancer. You have a family waiting for you, friends expecting to see you that night, and a mother expecting you at a train station the next morning. Then suddenly, you disappear. No goodbye, no confirmed sighting, no body, and no answer for more than 3 decades. But then, in 2026, something happened that changed the case. A coroner officially found that Revelle Balmain was dead, and people connected to the agency where she worked became persons of interest. But here's the disturbing part. Revelle's body has still never been found. So what happened to this 22-year-old woman on the night of November 5th, 1994? And why did it take more than 30 years for authorities to reach this point? This is the story of Revelle Balmain. Revelle Sabine Balmain was 22 years old when she disappeared from Sydney, Australia in November 1994. She was a model and dancer, and she also worked as an escort. But according to accounts from her family, Revelle had bigger plans. She was preparing for another trip to Japan, where she was expected to continue working as a dancer. In other words, she wasn't simply drifting through life. She had plans, she had people she cared about, and she had a future she was looking forward to. On November 5th, 1994, Revelle was working in Sydney. That evening would become the last confirmed day of her life. On the afternoon of November 5th, Revelle went to a booking in the Kingsford area. The appointment was with a client, Gavin Sammer. According to evidence later given during investigations, Revelle arrived at around 4 p.m. The appointment was supposed to last approximately 2 hours, and afterwards, she had plans. She was supposed to meet a friend. At around 7:15 p.m., Revelle spoke with her friend Kate Brentnall on the phone. She told her she was about to leave her client. They discussed meeting at the Royal Hotel in Paddington. The kind of conversation nobody would remember as significant until the person on the other end of the phone never showed up. Revelle never made it to that meeting, and that phone call became one of the last known contacts anyone had with her. This is where the timeline becomes increasingly disturbing. Gavin Sammer later told police that he drove Revelle to the Red Tomato Inn after their appointment. He said this happened at around 7 p.m., but there was a problem. According to later accounts, staff at the hotel did not see Revelle there, and Revelle simply disappeared from the timeline. Her friend was waiting. Her family was expecting her the following morning, but Revelle was gone. The next morning, she was supposed to meet her mother in Newcastle. She never arrived. At first, perhaps people hoped there was an innocent explanation. Maybe she had changed her plans. Maybe she had decided to stay somewhere else. Maybe she would simply call. But she didn't. And then police began finding her belongings. What investigators discovered around Kingsford made the disappearance even more disturbing. Personal belongings belonging to Revelle were found scattered around the area. Her makeup bag, her keys, her diary, other personal possessions, and one particularly memorable item, one of her shoes. Another shoe was found somewhere else. These weren't belongings neatly left behind. They were scattered, and Revelle herself was nowhere to be found. Police now had a missing 22-year-old woman, a strange trail of belongings, and a very small window in which something could have happened. The question became, where was Revelle after she left the client? And more importantly, who was she with? Police investigated the people who had been around Revelle that night. Her client became an important focus of the investigation. The circumstances surrounding the final appointment were examined. The police also questioned people connected to the escort agency where Revelle worked. But despite the investigation, nobody was charged. Years passed, then decades, and Revelle remained missing. In 1999, a coronial inquest concluded that Revelle had died at the hands of a person or persons unknown. But without a body, and without enough evidence to prosecute someone, the case remained unresolved. For Revelle's family, there was no closure. They couldn't bury her, they couldn't say goodbye, and they couldn't answer the simplest question, where is she? Most cold cases slowly disappear from public attention. Revelle's case didn't. Investigators continued looking at old evidence, and advances in forensic technology eventually brought renewed attention to the case. In 2008, police reported that forensic evidence had strengthened a theory that Revelle may have been murdered inside a Kingsford house connected to her final client. But again, there was a problem. Evidence pointing toward a theory is not the same thing as evidence sufficient to prove a murder in court. No body was recovered. No one was charged. and the case remained open. Then, years later, another major development came. In 2021, the New South Wales government and NSW Police announced a $1 million reward for information that could help solve Revelle's disappearance. By then, more than 26 years had passed. Think about that. A woman disappeared in 1994. Her family waited through the 1990s, then the 2000s, then the 2010s, and now the 2020s. But investigators weren't finished. The case was formally reviewed and assigned for reinvestigation under Strike Force Aramac. Police also conducted forensic searches as part of the renewed investigation. And then came the development that would change how the case was viewed. In 2026, more than 30 years after Revelle disappeared, the case returned to a coronial inquest. Friends and people connected to Revelle's life gave evidence about her final hours. The court examined what happened before she vanished. It examined the people around her. And it examined the information that had been provided to investigators over the years. One particularly striking part of the proceedings involved Jane King, a former boss connected to the escort agency where Revelle worked. King gave evidence about what she knew at the time. She reportedly told the court that she had changed aspects of her account to police because she feared her then-husband, Zoran Stanijevic. Both King and Stanijevic were subsequently identified as persons of interest in the case. But this is extremely important. Being a person of interest does not mean someone has been proven guilty. Neither has been charged with Revelle's disappearance. On July 31, 2026, Deputy State Coroner Joan Baptiste delivered findings in the case. The coroner found that Revelle had died, and the matter was referred back to the New South Wales Police Unsolved Homicide Unit for further investigation. That is a major development. After more than 3 decades, authorities were no longer treating Revelle simply as a missing person. Her death was formally recognized. But the biggest mystery remains: where is Revelle's body, and who is responsible for her death? Those questions remain unanswered. There are still so many unanswered questions surrounding that November night. Why were Revelle's belongings scattered around Kingsford? What happened after she left the client? Was she ever actually at the Red Tomato Inn? Who saw her after approximately 7 p.m.? What happened inside the final locations connected to her disappearance? And why did so much information surrounding the case remain unresolved for so long? Investigators have spent decades trying to reconstruct those final hours. But a missing person case becomes incredibly difficult when the physical evidence disappears with the victim. And in Revelle's case, the biggest piece of evidence is still missing: Revelle herself. For more than 30 years, Revelle Balmain's family lived with something most people could never imagine. They didn't know where she was. They didn't know exactly how she died, and they couldn't give her a proper farewell. But now, after decades of uncertainty, there has been one significant step forward. A coroner has found that Revelle died. The investigation has been returned to the Unsolved Homicide Unit, and people connected to the case have once again come under scrutiny. Still, there has been no arrest, no conviction, and no grave. Revelle was only 22. She had plans to travel. She had a career she wanted to pursue. She had friends waiting for her. She had a mother expecting her at a train station the next morning. And then, she vanished. More than 3 decades later, her family is still waiting for the one thing they have wanted all along: the truth about what happened to Revelle Balmain. If you know something about Revelle's disappearance, Australian authorities continue to appeal for information, because after 32 years, the case may finally be closer to an answer.